Hey everybody! There's a Festival Tales of Kaldheim event going on in Arena right now. You basically enter with a certain amount of gems or coins, and you can only play with the 7 pre-constructed decks that they have created on Arena. Each of them feature cards from Kaldheim. They're not all from Kaldheim though, but they do employ whatever the Kaldheim sub-theme is for those colors. And I decided that I would go ahead and make a video of each of the decks and see how they do. I've already gotten my 3 wins. Basically, you just get a showcase Kaldheim card for each of the wins that you get. You only get up to a maximum of 3. Okay, this is a little light on lands, and we also, in this particular deck, want to really get Clarion Spirit going early in the game to create a lot of flyers. So this is better. Fae of Wishes, they do include a good sideboard so that you can cast the sorcery portion of this. I'm not sure what to bottom here, actually. Could bottom a plains, I guess, since we have both our colors in the pathways. Hopefully we hit our land drops, but if we don't, we have some 2 mana plays for the next few turns. We also have an opt. Our opponent is on the Boros Goldspan Dragon deck. Some of the sideboard cards include Radiant Fountain, maybe we should Defiant Strike first in case we draw a land. Nope. Really need to hit a land drop. There we go. Now we can definitely get some value out of Clarion Spirit next turn. Unfortunately, we can't do Clarion Spirit into Raptor because we only have 1 white, but we can do Clarion Spirit and a Fae of Wishes. So some of the sideboard cards, I also know Alrund's Epiphany is in there to take another turn. Shatter the Sky in case you need a board wipe, which I have had to do against this particular deck before. Let's go ahead and make a Spirit token. Should we offer the trade with Gadrak? I think we should. If we can get a flying blocker out of the way, then our Fae and our Spirit next turn are ready to go. I don't think foretelling a card counts as actually casting a spell, so we don't get to foretell Starnheim and cast Raptor and get any value out of the Spirit. Okay, never mind. So they do have something at instant speed. Could definitely be a Fire Prophecy. Oh man, these Archons can be great game enders, but just having issues with land drops right now. So that was a good turn. I forgot to actually show what the deck is before I just kind of went into the game playing it. So okay, we could make 2 angel tokens if we wanted to, or we could find a card outside the game. I think I like that better. So these are the cards they have. Alrund's Epiphany, Faith's Fetters, Inscription of Insight, Glorious Anthem, Bind the Monster, Shatter the Sky, and Radiant Fountain. Basically, it's like, okay, do you need single targeted removal? Do you need to take an extra turn to basically just close out the game? Do you need to pump all of your go wide creatures, or do you need to get rid of the board state? I know that they have multiple Gadraks in this deck, and they also have multiple Goldspan Dragons, so pumping our creatures probably isn't going to do a whole lot. So I think we'll take Shatter the Sky just in case we need to do a board wipe. Probably keep up one chump blocker for Torbren. They definitely have the mana to cast Goldspan Dragon. I know Magda, Brazen Outlaw is also in the deck, including some Dwarven Mines. Maul of the Skyclaves. Alright, that's an interesting draw. That's going to present some issues for our flyers. Alright, that was strange. Now we can Starnheim for... oh, we can't do it for 3 because we still have to pay the single white, so we could only do it for 2 right now. I'll just stay back, I think. Just keep our board state nice and wide because we can always shatter if we need to. It is at sorcery speed, unfortunately, so if they were to somehow get out a bunch of hasted creatures. Alright, Clarion Spirit. That definitely makes me want to shatter a little bit sooner rather than later. I think we'll shatter next turn, and then we'll go ahead and send in with everybody here. That way we can get at least a couple of little damage in. I would love to draw another land next turn, be able to play this Starnheim for 3, make 3 4/4 angels. They do have the Maul, and they have a couple flyers in their deck, so it's not going to be quite the devastating end that most of the games are when you can play Starnheim Unleashed. Showdown of the Scalds, giving them access to some flyers over there for sure. Did draw the land. There are quite a few card draw spells in the deck, so it would be great to draw something like an Opt. Alright, there's the Gold Span Dragon. It's only going to be able to block one of the angels next turn. If they send in with it, I'm not even going to block. Okay. They did not. So if we send in with the angels, I think they're still dead. Okay. Kaldheim Unleashed closing out the game. That is a really good card. Alright, so for those of you who are interested in the deck for that game, there are 4 copies of Battlefield Raptor, 1 copy of Defiant Strike, 4 of Opt. These lower costed cards are to take advantage of the Clarion Spirit, which is one of the key cards in the deck. You want to be double spelling a lot and creating a lot of flyers, which is going to benefit your Watcher of the Spheres. Creature spells with flying you cast cost 1 generic less, and whenever another creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1. So if you're double spelling all over the place and getting these Clarion spirits to go off, creating flying spirits, then your Watchers can get pumped really big, and then you can also put a staggering insight onto them to give them lifelink, +1/+1, and a card draw engine to again play some of your cheaper spells. The 2 Fae of Wishes are to get your cards from the sideboard in, whatever you might need. 2 copies of the double-faced Sajiri Shelter and Sajiri Glacier can protect your Clarion Spirits, your Watchers, or your Harmonious Archon, which is a fantastic card in the deck. Unfortunately, we had to bottom 2 of them during that game just because of land issues, but non-Archon creatures have base power and toughness 3/3, so that's going to pump up all of your spirit tokens and make them 3/3s in the air instead of 1/1s. It also makes your opponent's scary threats go down to 3/3s, so essentially you're just trading your tokens into their big scary things, like can be devastating against something like an Ashaya deck or some of the gods decks with the bigger creatures. The 1 copy of Kaldheim Unleashed, which usually does close out the game when you can play it. 4 copies of the Raven's Warning Saga rare from Kaldheim. You create a bird, gain some life, when you deal combat damage on the 2nd chapter with a creature with flying, you get to look at your opponent's hand, which can help set up your next plays, and you get to draw a card, and then you can put one of your sideboard cards on top of your library. Gust of Wind, which should only cost you 1 in a blue, because you're almost always going to control a creature with flying in this deck. If not, you should definitely not be casting this card for its full cost. You can return a non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, so that also includes things like Maul of the Skyclave or other problematic artifacts or enchantments that your opponent controls. And then finally, there are 3 copies of Ameria's Call and Ameria's Shattered Skyclave, which is more fun to cast for the 4/4 White Angel Warrior creature side, but sometimes you just need it for the land drop. And then you have the Pathways and 4 copies of the Temple. Alright, so for deck 2, which I have not actually played with yet in this event, it's Demon's Rise, the Rakdos Sacrifice deck. Starting off with 2 copies of Village Rites, 4 copies of Heartless Act, which you can also use to target your own creatures to get some of the sacrifice payoffs, 3 copies of Skyclave Shade, which can't block, but if you kick it from the grave, it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, essentially getting a 5/3 every time a land enters the battlefield under your control, because you can cast it from your graveyard. Forbidden Friendship, which is just going to make your 2 little tokens, one of which has haste. That's extra sacrifice fodder because you don't really care about your tokens. 4 copies of Magmatic Channeler. As long as there are 4 or more instant or sorceries in your grave, it gets +3/+1. and you can tap it and discard a card to exile the top 2 of your library, choose one of them, and then you can play that card this turn, which is a bit risky because you are exiling the other one permanently. So if it's like your 1 copy of Terror of the Peaks, that's going to be disappointing. So don't cast this super early if you're not prepared to potentially lose some of your better cards. If you were to reveal 2 of your higher costed cards, you're just getting rid of them because you don't have the mana to play them yet. Scorching Dragonfire, 2 copies for an instant to deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and if it would die, then it's exiled instead. The modal double dual face card for this deck is Palaka Predation. For 2 and a black, you can target your opponent to reveal their hand. You choose a card from it with CMC 3 or greater, and they discard, or it comes in as a tap land. 4 copies of Carter's Vicious Return. You may sacrifice a creature, which you're going to want to do with your tokens most likely, or you can do the Skyclave Shade since it comes back. When you do, it deals 3 damage to any target. You can also discard cards. Again, you're going to want to discard either instants or sorceries to take advantage of Magmatic Channeler or the Shade because it's going to be able to come back. And then for the 3rd chapter, you can return that creature card with a +1/+1, and it gains haste. Rankle is something that you could potentially throw in the graveyard as well because it's going to come back as a 4/4. It has flying and haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, each player loses 1 life and draws a card, sacks a creature, or discards. Cauldron's Gift for 4 and a black is a sorcery, and if it was adamant, which means if it was cast with at least 3 black mana, mill 4 cards. You may choose a creature card in your graveyard. If you do, return it to the battlefield with a +1/+1. Terror of the Peaks, a 3 double red flying dragon, spells your opponent's cast cost an additional 3 life if they want to target Terror of the Peaks, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. For the top end of the curve, we have 4 and 2 black for Gormand. There are 2 copies of this flying trampled demon, and as an additional cost, you have to sacrifice a creature. Whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. And Demon of Loathing, another flying trampled demon. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they have to sacrifice a creature. So we have a multitude of lands in this one. 7 swamps, 4 mountains, the full pathways, 2 copies of Bloodfell Caves, tapped life gain, 2 copies of Immersturm Skullcairn, which is our first utility land from Kaldheim. You can pay generic black double red and tap it to sacrifice it. It deals 3 damage to a player, and that player has to sacrifice a card or discard a card. Yeah, discard a card. And then 4 copies of the Scry land as well. So let's play with this deck and see how it goes. Not sure why it's not submitting it there. There we go. Like I said, I haven't actually played with this deck yet in this event. Rakdos, Sacrifice, Graveyard synergies are not my favorite way to play Magic. So unfortunately we have a lot of our higher costed cards, none of our early stuff that's going to get us some good sacrifice stuff going. This is better. We got Skyclave Shade, which we can sacrifice with the return. And I think we will bottom... probably just bottom a swamp. Play our tap land first. It's going to be a while before we can cast that. It's just going to get stuck in our hand. And we don't have anything that's going to let us self-mill right now. The Ringheart Crest from our opponent. So ideally we would like to keep the Shade on the board until we can play Carter's Return. Sika. Just Scorching Dragonfire does nothing to Asika. So unfortunately, turn 3 was just a dead turn. So we can kill Grumgully with Carter's Return. And then we can discard Gourmand and bring that back. Scorching Dragonfire doesn't kill either of their creatures, unfortunately. Alright, I'm fine with that. So we're going to take 4 here. We can kill Rada now with Scorching Dragonfire. They have to sack a creature. Forgot about that part. They might just sack Rada. It's their weakest creature at this point. Yeah. And do the Channeler now. Gourmand has haste. Alright, they have a Fire Prophecy to get rid of Gourmand, but we can bring it back again with a second Carter's Return, which our opponent is probably not going to be very happy about. Gigantha the Wellspring. Alright, we did finally hit a land, so we can cast Terror of the Peaks. I think we will. I think we'll do Terror of the Peaks this turn. And then next turn, we'll do Carter's Vicious Return. Sacrifice the Channeler. Deal 3 damage to the face. No blocks. Ooh, now we can Heartless Act. I think I like that better. If they go for the block with the Sika, we could have taken her out with Dragonfire, but she doesn't take the bait. A second Isika is strange because they can only keep one. Alright, yeah, they probably realized, they were like, what did I just do? Okay, so didn't get to play the second Carter's Return, which would have been great, bringing back the Gormand a second time, but still won that game. Let's go on to the third deck, Foretellings. This is going to center around the Cosmos Charger from Kaldheim for 3 and a blue. It is a flash flying horse spirit. Foretelling cards from your hand costs 1 less, so it only costs 1 to foretell, and you can do it on any player's turn. You can also foretell Cosmos Charger for 2 and a blue, and it then costs 2 and a blue, and sometimes that can be worth it because it's a flash flyer. So if your opponent is on like the white-blue deck and they have a Watcher of the Spheres that's coming at you for 2 in the air, you can flash in the Cosmos Charger and kill it. This does have a companion card, Karuga the Macro Sage, the Dinosaur Hippo. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each other permanent you control with CMC 3 or greater, which is all of our cards. So we have Queen of Ice, who does have a sorcery which you tap one of their creatures and it doesn't untap. And whenever she deals combat damage to a creature, you tap it, and again, it doesn't untap during their next step. Raven form can exile problematic issues that we have from our opponent, if they have like an Ashaya, for example, and we just really need to get rid of it. Brazen Borrower returns a non-land permanent, so again, it cannot return an Ashaya to its owner's hand, for example, because it counts as a land, and then that also makes everything else in their hand count, or on their board, count as a land. Bone Crusher Giant, 4 copies. You can deal 2 damage with Stomp, and whenever it becomes the target of a spell, they deal 2 damage to their controller as well. 4 copies of Demon Bolt, which is a great single target removal spell. 4 copies of Scorn Effigy, which you can foretell and then cast it for 0. So essentially, you can get a 2/3 for 1 mana if you have Cosmos Charger out, and this only costs 1 to foretell, and then you cast it for free. Behold the Multiverse, which is going to help us set up our draws and then draw 2. 4 copies of the Charger, 1 copy of Alrund, God of the Cosmos, who is also Haka Whispering Raven on the other side. The God side says he gets 1/1/1 for each card in your hand and each foretold card you own. And at the beginning of your end step, you choose a card type, then reveal the top 2 cards of your library. Put all cards revealed this way of the chosen type into your hand. So I think the majority of what we're going to want is creature, because the majority of our adventure card sides are instants. We also have a couple of good sorcery cards, so we wouldn't want to split those up unless we're hunting for something particular, like Raven form. 4 copies of Stormwing Entity, which we're almost always going to want to cast for 1 and a blue if we have cast an instant or sorcery this turn, and when it enters we can scry. 1 copy of Shark Typhoon, which you want to play this as its actual enchantment side card, but you can cycle it if you need to in a pinch. Seagate Restoration. If you can cast this for 4 triple blue and draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1, and you have no max hand size for the rest of the game. You can also use it as a shock land if you need to. And Volcanic Salvo for 10 double red. However, it's going to be X less to cast depending on how many creatures you have out on the board. Deals 6 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures or planeswalkers. So we have our basics, the full pathway set, a Surtland Frostpire, another utility land, 2 double blue and red, tap, sacrifice, scry 2, and it deals 2 damage to each creature. So this is good against opponents' decks that are trying to go wide, like the blue-white Foretell deck. A lot of those don't have a power of greater than 2. The 2 life gain lands and the 4 scry lands for this particular set. Okay, this hand looks pretty good. Several cards to foretell and a storming entity. Would love to see a Cosmos Charger. I also like that in this event they have coordinated the sleeves with each deck. I think that's pretty cool. The third eye for foretelling. Alright, our opponent is on a slow start. Which is giving us time to foretell. Ooh, they're stuck on mana. Scry 2, draw 2. Now they could have the Fire Prophecy, which could take out our entity, but we're still going to benefit off of it from scrying. We did have the Fire Prophecy, probably going to go hunting for a land. Okay, we have another storming entity, probably don't need another mountain right now. Still no creatures from our opponent. Let's see. We could just hard cast Storming Entity. I mean, we're not really doing much this turn. Okay. Rada. Alright, let's see. Probably Behold. There's our Cosmos Charger. Now we can Stormwing Entity. Scry. Another Demon Bolt seems good. So we're going to try to benefit off of the Prowess ability on the entity next turn. Ooh, they named Elemental with their Ringheart Crest, which is a bit odd to me. Okay, so we can play the Charger, which is going to make our Foretell cards less. Demon Bolt, Rada. Foretell Scorn Effigy. Foretell another Bolt. Alright. I'm not sure if the Cosmos Charger affects stacks to essentially make our Foretell cards free. Should find that out. So next turn we can use Queen of Ice to tap Toski. for Giganta. I do have to turn the microphone off for just a second. Alright guys, so far we are 4-0, and unfortunately I still have to have the microphone off. I get calls sometimes from overseas family members, and I can't control when they call and when they can't call. So next up we will have the Ren and Siri deck, which I will hover over the cards. Selfless Savior, 4 copies. Gilded Goose. This is actually the deck that I've had the least success with. I think it's the most difficult to stand up to some of these higher powered decks, but it is my favorite deck because I do have a Ren and Siri commander deck that I just love, which also uses Kahira as a companion because I make everything cats in my deck. So going back silent, but we'll continue to play, and hopefully we can get a 7-0 run. Okay, so as I expected, the Rin and Seri deck is just not doing as well. I think it really wants people to take advantage of the life gain that Rin and Seri can have. By its using its tap ability. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough right now to get there, because it takes a full Naya to gain life equal to the number of cats we own, which at this point would only be 3 anyway, so we're dead in the sky. So the Rin and Seri deck, definitely the weakest of the precons in this event. But that is only our first loss. If this were a draft format, we would be doing fantastic right now. Alright, 2 to go. Golden Horde, which is one of my favorite decks that they have created here. We have 4 copies of Frostbite, which is almost always going to do 3 damage because we have multiple snow-covered lands. 1 copy of Tormentor's Helm. The Blood Aspirant is a key card in this deck. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, and that includes sagas and treasure tokens, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and you can actually sacrifice a creature or enchantment to deal 1 damage to a target creature and make it unable to block that turn. 3 copies of Magda Brazen Outlaw, which is going to create treasure tokens to sacrifice to put on Blood Aspirant. 4 copies of Rimrock Knight to pump something, and it's also a dwarf for Magda's ability. Shatter Skull Smashing, you want to try and cast this for its sorcery side as often as you can to be able to do damage to different targets. 1 Maul of the Skyclaves, 1 Search for Glory. You can search for a snow permanent, legendary, or saga. You also gain a life for each snow mana spent to cast the spell. 2 copies of Gadrak, who cannot attack unless you control 4 or more artifacts, and treasure tokens are artifacts. At the beginning of your end step, you create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. 2 copies of Seize the Spoils to create more treasure tokens. 3 copies of Torbrand to make all of our red spells that much more of a damaging threat. 2 copies of Showdown of the Skalds, which you can exile the top 4, so it's basically a draw 4 spell. We have 1 copy of Kenrith the Returned King to make Trample and Haste for all of our creatures, which is pretty much the only side we're going to be able to cast this on. We could also do 2 and a white to gain 5 life, but we don't have any of the other colors unless we used Shimmer Drift Veil for something else. I don't think there's anything else that we would really need to use him for, though. I have yet to cast him in this deck. It's usually just too fast of a deck. 1 copy of Elspeth Conquers Death to bring back something from the grave that we might need. 4 copies of Goldspan Dragon, which again just creates a horde of treasure tokens, and 1 copy of the ever-present Ember Cleave. I actually tried the Rin and Seri deck 3 times in a row. It was the first deck that I tried, and it just never worked. It never won, not a single time. So unfortunately we do have all 3 of these are going to come in tapped. Now all 4 of our lands come in tapped. So our opponent looks to be on the Rin and Seri deck. Indeed, they do have the cat sleeves. We can just go ahead and kill that savior now. Feline Sovereign. Have this tap for red. Unfortunately, we do have a pretty slow start. Now with Feline Sovereign's ability, they can get rid of Maul, but we have enough mana now to be able to cast Goldspan Dragon next turn. So they might actually end up beating us here with the Ren and Seri deck, just because our deck ended up going so slowly. Now our spells are going to do that much damage +2. So we could, this essentially hits for 4, this hits for 5. Goldspan Dragon was probably not the best thing to cast there. I think we might just be dead anyway. Yep. So we are dead anyway. From a Ren and Seri deck, no less, after I just talked all that shit about it. So that was a very slow start for this deck, unfortunately. Just didn't do what it wanted to do, didn't make the treasures fast enough. Alright, and our last deck is the King Narfi deck, Touch of the Grave, excuse me. It's going to center around snow and zombies. So we have 4 copies of Deadweight. We have 4 copies of Frantic Inventory to draw cards. Ephemia the Cacophony, if we exile an enchantment, which Deadweight is, we create a 2/2 zombie creature token. 4 copies of Mire Triton to mill 2, gain 2. 2 copies of Wither Crown to throw on our opponent's creatures. 3 copies of Eon, God of Death, which is also on the backside the Throne of Death. We can mill a card with that side. It's also a Death Toucher on the one side. So it's almost always going to be Throne of Death first, just until we fill our graveyard up enough. And with Timurit Calls the Dead, we can mill our graveyard quite a bit. Murderous Rider can destroy anything, which is a great adventure. It can also destroy planeswalkers, and it's a 2/3 lifelinker that gets put on the bottom of our library when it dies. Teferi, Master of Time, we can phase out something that we don't necessarily want to be able to block some of our things. We have Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths. They put 2 piles of our cards. One pile gets put into our hand and the other into our graveyard. 3 copies of Narfi, Betrayer King. This is the key card around which the entire deck centers. Snow and zombie creatures we control get +1/+1. And for 3 snow mana, we can return him from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. We also have Icebreaker Kraken, which is going to cost 1 less for each snow land we control. When it enters the battlefield, artifacts and creatures target opponent controls do not untap during their next untap step. If we return 3 snow lands we control to our hand, then it gets returned to its owner's hand as well if we need to protect it. Also, just for good measure, we have Baseless Haven, which can become a 4/3 vigilant creature in and of itself. So I have, again, not played with this deck actually during the event because Graveyard Recursion is just, and Self-Mill particularly, are just not two strategies that I enjoy playing in Magic, but it is good to be familiar with them and to get through all of the decks. Starting out with an Ice Tunnel, Frantic Inventory, Ephemia. So not the best, but we do have decent fixing, and we can draw some cards. Can deadweight the Raptor. That'll just get an enchantment in our grave for Ephemia right away. I like the idea of trying to just get aggressive here because our opponent is on the blue-white Flyers deck and they are going to be able to race pretty effectively. There's our Narfi. Unfortunately, we did mill a dual land. Okay, so our opponent just scoops right away. Let's see what their foretold card was. Starnheim Unleashed. Alright, so now you have seen all 7 of the decks that were created for the Festival of Kaldheim event. I'm not entirely sure when the event ends, but I know it's pretty soon, so if you haven't played it, I would recommend doing it, even if not for the showcase cards, which I forgot to show off what you get there. You get a showcase version of Esika, God of the Tree, a showcase version of Esika's Chariot, and the showcase of Toski, Bearer of Secrets. And as of right now, that is the only way to get the showcase of these 3 cards, so if you would like those cosmetics, this is the way to do it. I did it just for the fun precons and being able to experiment with some of the new Kaldheim cards. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will be putting up some more draft videos later, and hopefully we can get some good wins out of that too. Thanks for watching.